This week's episode of Astonishing Legends is brought to you by the Great Courses Plus, Policy Genius, Blue Apron, and our contributors at patreon.com.
Almost 1,200 years ago, sometime around the year 827, Sorbian Prince Slavibor was born in the city of Melnik, which is located in the central Bohemian area of the Czech Republic. Prince Slavibor was a man of the people, known for taking good care of them. He burnt wooded areas to make way for fertile ground that could be farmed, and founded several new villages to ensure that his subjects would prosper. He's probably most famously known in history for being the father of Saint Ludmila, who was strangled to death by henchmen sent at the behest of her daughter-in-law 1,096 years ago, almost to the day this episode of Astonishing Legends is being posted. Prince Slavibor also had a son named Houska. Slavibor was so fond of him that he had a wooden fortress known as Castle Houska built in his honor on a prominent prism-shaped piece of limestone 16 miles northeast of Melnik, where the family lived. This is 41 miles northeast of modern-day Prague. This piece of land was rumored to have been cursed, possibly since at least the time of the Celts. There's no way to know if Slavibor was aware of this. At the time, Slavic religion was pagan in nature. Maybe Prince Slavibor thought he could tame the curse through some pagan rituals. It's hard to know. Prince Slavibor's son, Houska, would never move into Houska Castle, however, because no sooner had people begun taking up residence there when just outside the perimeter of the castle, the limestone it was built upon cracked open, revealing a deep chasm of darkness. From what became known to locals as a gateway to hell, evil spirits emerged, wreaking havoc on all living things. Legend states that there were half-human chimeras, part man, part animal, that could fly. Men in the area were struck down and afflicted with crippling conditions. Livestock were killed, and crops in the area wilted away. The new residents of Castle Houska fled for their lives, leaving the sad monument to a good prince's son abandoned for what may have been over 400 years as it fell into disrepair, slowly rotting away. Sometime between the years 1280 and 1290, a Bohemian knight and duke of the extremely wealthy Dubé clan, Heinrich Berka, with the permission of the Iron and Golden King, Přemysl Ottokar II, decided to build a new stone castle on the site. There are written records of the duke's ownership dated to the year 1316. Berka had no doubt heard that the locals had tried desperately to fill the pit with stone. But no matter how much they dropped into it, there was no effect. It simply thirsted for more. The duke, however, was determined to find out what lay inside this gateway to hell. So he made a bargain with some imprisoned men from his village who had been sentenced to death. They were told that if they would agree to be lowered on a rope into the hole and report back what was there upon emerging, that they would be pardoned. Many signed up for this macabre task, but no one survived the mission for more than a few days. All who were lowered into the pit suffered the same fate as the first man who had reluctantly agreed to go in exchange for his freedom. As he was lowered down into the darkness, trembling in terror, bystanders on the surface anxiously stood by, trying to conceal their fear of the unknown. A few minutes passed as the prisoner descended deeper and deeper into the bottomless pit, when suddenly, blood-curdling screams pierced the darkness of the hole. The men frantically brought the condemned prisoner back to the mouth of the pit, where the Duke anxiously awaited a description of what he had seen. But the wait was pointless. The man's hair had turned completely white, and his face had aged several decades in the few short minutes he had been in the pit. The prisoner babbled for a moment about a horrible stench, total darkness, and distant screams before losing his mind entirely. He died 2 days later of unknown causes. These same circumstances repeated themselves with all the prisoners the Duke could convince to go down there. He must have thought that whatever that pit was, it had to be contained at all costs, So we had a one-of-a-kind fortress built over the chasm in the same area. Prince Slavibor built his first castle all those centuries ago. This new Castle Houska was, for all intents and purposes, inside out. You see, most castles have defenses against enemies that would attack from the outside. But this castle was inverted. Its battlements focused inward. Its layout constructed to trap something within, not defend from without. Heavy stone plates were placed over the pit itself, and a chapel was built above it. This chapel was adorned a few centuries later with frescoes that can be seen to this day, depicting a centaur-like creature with what appears to be a lion's body and a woman's torso. She is drawing a bow with her left hand and aiming it at a person's neck. The left-handed draw on the bow representing the hand of evil. There is also a fresco of what is thought to be Michael the Archangel lancing a demon on the ground. In the book of Revelation in the New Testament, Michael leads God's armies in their victory against Satan's forces. One has to wonder, is Castle Houska a last defense for humanity at a gateway to hell? Welcome back to Astonishing Legends. I'm Scott Philbrook, and this is Forrest Burgess.
The gates of hell are open night and day. Smooth the descent and easy is the way. John Dryden's translation of Virgil's Aeneid, Book 6, line 126.
Join us tonight for part 1 of our in-depth series on Czechoslovakia's Castle Houska and the gateway to hell beneath it.
And we're back.
You may have noticed some slight changes in our show tonight.
Yes, everything is still here. We're just rearranging things a bit in an effort to evolve ever so slightly.
Some very light housekeeping tonight. One thing which you already know, I think, is that our new coffee mugs are flying off the shelves.
Uh-oh, what, poltergeist activity?
No, you wish.
Okay.
They're selling like crazy. So if you want to get one, head over to astonishinglegends.com and click on the store link to check them out. Or you can head over to our Patreon page where at certain reward levels, you get credits for swag anyway.
Yeah, well, and lastly, we're making a slight schedule adjustment. Since we launched, we've had a few different drop days for the show. If you've been following us, you'll know that. Initially, we were following the New Music Tuesday philosophy, and then we went to Saturdays and then back to Fridays, and I don't know. I can't keep track of this, but we're making another change.
Yes, but it's not a major one. We found that sometimes we get backed into a corner with an episode, and we need a slight cushion to get it out because life happens. Some shows take more research than we thought, like this one, and other times members of our post-production team might be unavailable for personal reasons, or, God forbid, one of us might even get sick or something.
So we're padding out our release days to a more generic, quote, by the end of the weekend, unquote. We're still going to aim for Fridays, but our promise is that you'll have it before you go back to work or school or wherever you go on Monday morning. So don't freak out if you don't see the show dropping into your smartphone on Friday night. It will be there before the weekend is out.
You should be out having fun anyway.
What is this fun you speak of?
Yeah, it's hard to remember.
I can't remember myself what that's like.
Yeah.
Anyway, I got to tell you, I love that opening, and it sums up a lot of what is frightening about Castle Houska. Houska. Well, that's
our friend Travis, who lived in Prague.
Yes, he actually speaks the language.
He said it's Houska.
I know, so it's Castle Houska.
Yes.
But still, it really only scratches the surface of this legendary domicile.
Well, fortunately for us, speaking of Travis, we were able to reach out to the local Astonishing Legends Bureau in Prague, where our good friends Travis Dow and Pete Coleman have extensive connections and experience.
Yeah, when did we get an office in Prague?
Travis and Pete have a show called the Bohemican Podcast over at podcastnik.com, and they were all too happy to go investigate Castle Houska. For them, it was just a quick road trip a couple miles away, and we'll be having at least one of those guys on the show next week because they've actually been to the castle. And in fact, you can find their episode on it on iTunes right now.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, guys. And thanks for doing the screaming Czech prisoner in the opening, Travis. Excellent performance. Anyway, visit podcastnik.com for Bohemican and other great shows. That's podcastnik, spelled NIK.com.
When you first suggested this, I mean, you brought it to my attention. I know it came from a listener, right?
Yes.
Originally.
Well, actually, we had a listener, Edward A. I don't want to say his last name. He didn't give us permission, but he emailed us way back on August 31st of 2016, which should give you some idea of
how long it takes us to get to our emails.
No, we read them at the time, and then it's like, and then we make a note of them. It's just like when it comes up again, it's like, hey, it's time to do maybe a haunted place story. And, of course, yes.
We go through stuff. We actually do go back and look at what's been sent to us.
Yeah, we have our own list. We've heard of stuff. That's what he was asking about. You guys have obviously heard this. Why don't you do an episode on that? And we've had listeners, great listeners recently, I think from Ireland, who've suggested, do Haunted Castle Lep in Ireland. And so there's a lot of great places, but this was on our list.
This is the thing, though, about this. With all due respect to
You thought it was going to be thin.
I thought it was going to be thin. With all due respect to Edward and you, because you seem to be into it as well. I was like, wait, it's this thing in the middle of the woods, whatever. I had no idea it was going to be a cork in the bottle of hell. It is unbelievable.
Right. But you think they're all, and I do too, you always think they're going to be thin. And then it's like every story we do, ladies and gentlemen, you start peeling away the layers of the haunted onion, and you realize, man, this goes pretty deep.
Wait, the haunted onion. That's going to be my beach bar. Live bands every Thursday.
It's a nice Irish bar, yes.
The haunted onion. Every third round is on the house.
Oh, well, then you're paying for that.
Yeah.
But the idea, though, is that you don't think there's going to be much. And the opposite is also true. You think that there's going to be a great story, and then you start looking at it, and you realize that, well, these leads don't really go anywhere. It's a bunch of hearsay. Yeah. And there's certainly plenty of folklore and superstition, regional, that goes along with this story as well. But there's also a lot of history.
Well, yeah, and that's something that I love. I mean, the one thing that I learned from this, and I was talking to our friend Travis about it, who we mentioned in the open here.
Yes, Travis J. Dow.
Yeah.
Yep.
One of the things that I learned was that I want to go to Czechoslovakia.
Oh, yes.
Bad. Because this place sounds amazing. It's just the history. And I'll tell you something, folks. One thing about this story is we couldn't find very much on this place in English at all.
And that's the key thing that you just said there is that there's not a lot of history that you can actually check out in English. Most of it's in Czech.
Right.
And the other thing about it is that it's very well known there, but there's not a lot of history written about it even there. You know what I'm saying?
That's right.
Right. There's from the Czech Republic, there's a few historians, I think, that have covered it. We've tried to get some books that we could read, and certainly we don't want to pester anybody by having them translate the entire thing.
Yeah.
So we're waiting still on one good source that's kind of a history of the whole area. But it hasn't come in yet. So we did the best we could. We translated with Google, but that's a little sketchy. So you have to patch this stuff together.
Yeah, and we were able to do that by corroborating. Did I say it right?
Yes, you have. No, ladies and gentlemen, you've given him a complex. I don't think you realize. Yeah.
Well, I'm embarrassed. I think it's a Southern thing where I'm throwing away a syllable or something.
So,
anyway,
you know what? Just do it.
But we have corroborated a lot of the details from multiple sources that have some that have been translated by Google for us from Czech to English, others that were published in English. We found one really amazing free Google book, which we'll have a link to, that talks about the history of the families involved in the castle itself, but it's particularly mythic in its presentation.
Absolutely.
Which is insanely entertaining. I couldn't stop reading it. I was so into it. And I think you mentioned while we were developing this story, you were talking about Game of Thrones. This is the real thing. This is the real deal.
Yeah. Like the example I was telling Scott with the history of England, with the Knight of the Long Knives or the Long Daggers. This stuff is bloody, it's violent, it's cutthroat, literally in a lot of cases, and people, if you like that kind of thing, and you watch Game of Thrones, well, that's fictional. This stuff really did happen. Now, here's the problem, though, is that the history of the list of kings and rulers and all the duchies and who ruled what in Bohemia, really complicated.
It is incredible.
And Travis will tell you that. There's people with the same names who, because as a title you take the same name as a previous ruler who was your uncle's grandfather. It's crazy.
And then to make that further complicated, the guy who was blah, blah, blah the first was a real jerk. And then the guy who was a blah, blah, blah the second, a saint.
He's
he
a nice
was
guy.
Amazing.
And that's the guy that canonized.
If you say the wrong guy, you get then you get into trouble. So
exactly. But in addition to that, this is what I love also about this story is that there's some actual real history that you don't get to hear about a lot. And so we're going to bring some of that to the story tonight and tell you about it. But there's also a lot of, and people will say like, well, that's uncorroborated. But you know what? That's the really cool, spooky lore and superstition part of it, and the regional history and the folklore, which is what it is. And that's where the creepy, juicy parts are. You remember last time you were talking about discovering your roots and introduction to genealogy over the Great Courses Plus?
Yeah, I do. Professor Coletta gave out 10 great tips for how to get started with your genealogy research by interviewing relatives.
Right. Well, I was watching lecture number 2 in the series, Genealogy Online, Gems and Junk. And in this one, he gives out some great tips on how to go about your research online. But he also makes some great points which apply to any research online.
People tend to think everything is on the internet and that most of it, if not all of it, is true, especially if they already want to believe it, like great-grandpa Joe said we're related to George Washington.
Right.
But that's just not always the case. As Professor Coletta says, not all sources of information are equally reliable. It's not all online, and it's your responsibility to judge the accuracy of the information you find, both online and off.
And he says that as long as you keep that in mind, especially with genealogy, you are mentally armed to use the internet judiciously, which is good advice about looking anything up. Then he tells you what the best resource sites are to check out first, like the U.S. National Archives, the Library of Congress, and the 50 state archives. And there are a lot of other free resources on the web too, like FamilySearch.org, as well as university and historical societies who've uploaded their genealogy records.
See, that's what I love about this series. Like a lot of subjects over at the Great Courses Plus, it's really a how-to course, teaching you the best practices and methodologies by the top 1% of professors and experts in the country, with unlimited access to thousands of videos made available for streaming or download.
And the range of subjects over there is mind-boggling. You can learn about ancient history, forensics, and true crime, which is a really popular podcast genre right now, or you can even learn a new language. It really is lifelong learning at its best.
We think you'll get a kick out of just sampling courses on their site. And now you can do that for a whole month with unlimited access to all of their lectures for free.
That's right. Start your free month today by signing up with our special URL, which is thegreatcoursesplus.com/legends.
Remember, that's thegreatcoursesplus.com/legends.
This is Zach Bennett. Thank you for listening to Astonishing Legends. Let's get back to the show.
I think the first thing we should do before we get into the outline of the history of this area, of the castle itself and the crack and the gates to hell and all that, which, by the way, we're leading you into our fall season. We're going to be doing some more spooky stuff.
It's going to, so start listening later and later.
We like to do that every Halloween. We like to dole out the creepy ones.
Oh, people like that, yeah. So it's got some history, which is hopefully not dry. It's fascinating, but also some really wacky, weird stuff.
Well, let's talk
about that.
A couple of the things that have been seen. I mean, first we go back to what I mentioned in the opening about the story itself. And one of the most famous stories associated with Castle Houska is the story of the prisoner that is lowered down on the rope into the pit and comes out and he starts screaming, and they bring him up and his hair's white and he's aged 30, 40 years.
He was a younger man.
Yes.
A prisoner that was sentenced to death, and as a kind of a pardon, it's like, you agree to get lowered down into that pit. Tell us what you see. We'll let you go.
Yeah, piece of cake, right?
It's like, well, I can do that.
What's going to take? 15 minutes?
So what they didn't expect, though, was this guy to totally bug out. And he did not live long after that. He went mad in every sense of the word, and then was taken to a mental hospital of the equivalent of the time and passed away 2 days later. Now, I had heard it was a heart attack, but basically just he was so stressed out that it killed him.
Yeah, he died of fright.
He died of fright, exactly.
So that's the interesting thing about that. And then, so that's part of what was happening back then. The other thing that people were seeing was large black-winged. No one has said demons, but essentially they sound like demons circling in the courtyard.
We're talking about Harry Potter stuff.
Yeah.
But not so wispy spiritual and black smoke. That's another story. What people were describing, the locals, flying over the open courtyard, because this building, it's kind of a courtyard building. Like you may have an office building that has an open center. It's a square. As it's been described, it's a cube within a cube within a cube.
Yes.
And in the very center of it, there's an open courtyard, and people have seen black, leathery winged demon creatures flying around.
Yes.
Flapping. What Scott thinks is that all black palm tree in Arizona.
Oh, you stop with the tree.
No, but that's exactly what that thing looks like. What people were describing. Things
Doesn't fly though, does it? It just stands
it's a
there
still
like
picture.
a tree.
It's a still picture. We don't know.
Yeah.
But the point is that it's from day one of this crack in the ground opening up. Bad things have been reported coming out of it, and people have been freaked out. So we're talking, from the 800s, possibly even earlier, because there were Celt settlers. They have archaeological evidence that there was Celtic settlements there. Then possibly the Slavic peoples had moved in. So this is really pre-recorded history, and since that time to the present day, it's freaking people out.
Yeah, it's considered one of the most haunted castles in the Czech Republic.
Oh, yeah.
And in fact, there's a television show here in America called Ghost Hunters. And
International.
It was just Ghost Hunters originally,
Right.
And then they went international, I think.
Yeah.
And they took a trip to Castle Houska for episode 3, I think it was, of season 2 of their show, right?
Yes, exactly. As my friend, the producer, will say, it's assisted reality.
She, by the way, works in reality television.
Yes, she does some of that assisting. And no, they actually try and get what's there, but look, it's like a...
And I don't, by the way, I don't want to cast aspersions on them. My only issue with shows like that is not that they're intentionally... because they're doing all these experiments, they got all this gear in there. Right. It's not that they're intentionally hoping to deceive you. It may be fully accurate, the stuff that they catch and they see. My problem, this is about me.
Yes.
Is that if I'm not standing right there with you,
you're not spooked.
Looking at the gear, I just...
Oh, you don't know whether to trust
know.
It. Sure.
Yeah, I need to know that nothing has been tampered with, because I worked in post-production for however many years.
Sure.
I can make a lot of crazy stuff happen if you just give me 10 minutes in the edit bay.
Right.
So I always have the harder time with that, but I did really enjoy that episode. I mean, one of the main things I enjoyed about it was seeing inside the castle, since we can't go to Czechoslovakia this week.
Exactly.
And
exactly.
And I thought the experiments were really cool. And the other thing I thought was really cool about that episode of that show was that what stuff did happen that was creepy, but it was kind of understated, which did have me leaning towards believing in their experiments, because they didn't really.
No,
it didn't feel like they were doing a whole lot of exaggerating.
No, it's not the Disney album we listened to as kids. The librarian will put it on. It's the rattling chains and the whoa.
There's who's got my skinny toe? I have that on vinyl.
It's a classic.
I think I've Instagrammed it.
Right. This is what you'll find out if you talk to anybody who's done some paranormal investigations. And this is a term that I love. I'm glad I remember this. What they bring up in the show is that a lot of these experiences are what they call a personal experience.
Yeah.
So what they're talking about is when you get there.
That was great how they classified that.
I felt my spinal cord drop about 30 degrees, and I started tingling, and I felt short of breath. Well, that can't be recorded.
If you can't reproduce it on the gear, right. But they're saying if we do point a thermometer at you, and it shows the temperature dropping, then we have scientific proof that something unusual is happening, or something that corroborates what you're saying is happening.
Exactly.
Is happening.
Right.
But if we can't do that, if it's and that's the other thing that's really great about that, because I thought that was interesting when they said, what we want for you is evidence. This is a personal experience.
Yeah.
And they talk about the personal experiences, and it actually helped me with our vocabulary for our show. When I saw that, I thought, oh, this is good, because the point of the personal experience is that it can be a thing that you perceive that not only can it not be measured,
right.
It might not be happening outside your head, but then does that mean that you're crazy, or does it, or is something really happening inside your head that's just for you?
No, and you're getting at a thing that I bring up quite often, and I think some people get it, especially if you had an experience, and if you haven't and you don't really believe in this stuff, you'll never get it until you do. It's the devil in the diner experience, and that, people will say, I've said it ad nauseum, it's like, well, it's just a weird guy in a diner. It's like, you didn't feel that. And there wasn't another person, your best friend, sitting there with you who felt the same exact thing but did not say it at the time. So that's the personal experience. It's that feeling of like, I'm looking at the devil.
Yes.
And it's staring right into your soul, and you're chilled to your core. Well, when you go out and do these paranormal experiments and things like that, there's hours and hours and hours where nothing at all happens.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about some of the other lore that surrounds this place.
Yes. Yeah.
Some of the stories that have been told, and I've heard this two ways. Sometimes people see a large black horse outside the structure that's been decapitated
and
running around
gushing
and
blood.
gushing blood.
Yeah.
Another story says that it's a man dressed in black, decapitated, gushing blood. Both guys are gushing blood.
Yeah.
By the way, I just want to quickly, little aside on the gushing blood.
Sure.
In college, I lived with my roommate in North Carolina. We had this little apartment.
Phil.
Yeah, my buddy Phil, and we were in this apartment complex that there was just a lot. This is in Greensboro, North Carolina, and there's a ton of buildings in it.
Yeah.
But then for some reason there were these 3 buildings just on the other side of a fence that clearly had been built with these, but they got orphaned a long time ago and they went way downhill. So they looked just like ours.
Yeah.
But this was kind of
Unkempt.
the low rent.
Right.
Yeah, and I remember one night we were, I think we were cooking out, and then across the fence somebody came banging out of one of the screen doors, having an argument with his girlfriend or whoever his roommate was or whatever. And he went, "I'm gushing blood." And I've never forgotten it. So I don't know. That was the worst story ever.
Wait, he still had his head, right?
Yeah, I think she had stabbed him.
Are you kidding?
No, I'm not kidding.
Oh, dear. But you didn't see any blood.
No, he was bleeding pretty bad.
Oh, geez. So
whenever I hear the phrase gushing blood, whether it's the horse or the man at Houska Castle, I always think of the redneck guy that got stabbed across the way.
It freaked you out, but you went back to cooking your North Carolina barbecue.
Well, I can't remember if we called the police or the police just showed up.
I see.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a redneck ghost story is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for that.
I say redneck having been a redneck. I've still got it in my blood, so I don't want to save the emails.
No, we both,
I am a redneck. I can say that I'm a redneck. Parts of me, anyway.
Well, we both do, at least in parts of our family. So, but here's the deal with stories like that is that it's very dramatic looking, especially a horse, a headless horse gushing blood, a la The Godfather in the bed, or it's a man who's
that's
headless.
a horseless head.
There's still a lot of very nice. There's still a lot of blood though, and when you see it, I think your point being is that when you see blood, either spectral or real, coming from a stabbed redneck, it's very shocking. And so these are very frightening images that these people are seeing, and there's common ones to this place, and so the ones you hear all the time are going to be the flying leathery specters, the giant bat-like weird creatures flying around above the castle. You hear about the headless horse. You hear about the headless man. We're not saying it's one or the other. Yeah. Is that in addition to that? Yeah. You're seeing a bunch of things. Another
All I
one
know is if you see the headless man on the headless horse, get out of the way because they cannot see where they're going.
There is you'll be the one gushing blood. Yeah. But it's freaked people out from the beginning, from the early history, from the beginning of this, the history of this place. Another one that people claim to see quite often is a beautiful blonde woman
in
long
white.
hair,
Yes, the lady in white.
The lady in white, and she roams
inside
the upstairs.
Yes,
but people have seen her through the windows from the outside.
Right.
So nobody really knows. Usually, historically, you can find that was Lady so-and-so who was murdered on her wedding night.
Yeah.
And she roams the halls looking out the window for her lover. There's no historical connection that anybody could find to these particular characters. But repeatedly throughout the centuries, people have seen the same thing. So it makes you wonder.
An additional frequent sighting at Castle Houska is a group of men in black robes, chained together, prisoners, carrying body parts,
their own or others,
and being attacked along the way by a black dog.
Yeah, ripped apart like the hellhound.
They've been seen on the grounds, I guess. I don't know. I feel like that's still outside of the castle.
I believe that is still outside. And there's some specters that people claim to see inside solely, and these other ones they see outside. They're a little like the night marchers you see in Hawaii. Yeah.
Which I hadn't heard of. And this is a fun little aside. As we said on previous episodes, we just went to Podcast Movement. We met this really amazing guy there named Charlie Jewett, who has a podcast on retirement, actually. What's it called?
Renovating Retirement.
Retirement. But he was just super charismatic. He grew up in Hawaii and had just an amazing
He's
life.
a surfer. Yeah. When you see this guy, he's impossible.
Yeah, he's just the coolest dude. I was like, I'm already uncool, but now I'm like super uncool.
Now you look uncool.
He told us all about the Night Marchers and a really amazing story, which frankly I was so intrigued with. I might want to cover on a future show.
Yeah, warriors who, and again, well, I don't know a whole lot about. I studied a little bit about the history of Hawaii, and essentially the king's warriors were so embarrassed that they were so easily overtaken by modern weaponry that he ordered them to march off cliffs.
Right, and Charlie was out on a date, and at a couple points he had seen stuff, but he was out on a date one night, and he and his girlfriend were having a romantic evening on the cliff, and they look over a little ways down the beach, and they see just bright orbs, frankly.
Either
spheres
orbs,
of light.
could be torches that they're carrying.
But just going off a cliff.
Off the cliff.
Into the sea and disappearing before they hit the water. But he saw that and I just got chills.
Yeah, it's a real thing. Yeah, I mean, and if you live there for any length of time, you will usually see them.
But anyway, that ties back to, this group of chained men outside Houska. It's a recurring theme.
It's a recurring theme, and usually my belief is that when you get a place that's been around that long, and it is one of the most well-preserved castles in all of Europe, in Bohemia and Central Europe. It's very well-preserved. Well, it's not really fancy. It's just a big square.
Yeah.
It's a big block. But it fell into disrepair over the years, and we'll get
well
to that.
preserved from that time period.
From that time period.
Yeah.
But it's pretty much intact. And throughout the years, it has seen a lot of bloodshed from the 30 Years' War and lots of killing to World War II and the Nazis. We'll talk about that in a bit. But it's seen a lot of pain and misery and death. And when you have that all happening in one location, I believe there's a residue.
Well, and that's the thing that we talk about. Again, if you believe any of this at all, as Forrest was alluding to a minute ago, even if it wasn't haunted in the first place, after all this bad stuff goes down, a lot of times that's when things start to build up. If you believe it, but we've seen it with the stories that we've covered. Some of the other things that we've talked about. Oh, you know what? How about that creature? There's a hybrid creature there. There's lots
my favorite. It's really No. The other big thing is that the villagers, again, since day one, since the earth fissured open and ushered forth all kinds of hellish stuff.
Creatures.
Yeah. The one big recurring theme is hybrid
animals.
Cryptids. Well, like
cryptids,
They are kind of cryptids, but not your fun ones like Bigfoot that throw candy bars at you and rocks from a distance or tree knock. These have been reported to steal livestock, maim and kill livestock, maim or kill villagers that have wandered too close to the opening.
Yes.
So these aren't good creatures, and very weirdly described ones too. Again, not like your chupacabras or your.
Well, there was one. Wasn't there some like frog man?
Yes, it's my favorite one.
Yeah,
it's some kind of strange chimera of animal that is part bullfrog, part bulldog, and part human. So imagine that crawling around giving you the evil eye.
I think you are I think you're trying to reintroduce your favorite reference in the 1970s version of Invasion of the Body
Oh my
Snatchers.
God, you read my mind. You really did. I know you're going there.
The
but yes.
dog with the human face. Ugh, that scene is the worst.
I don't know, because that was pre-digital
So
era.
scary.
Yeah. I think they just put a latex mask, lifelike, kind of a Rick Baker
I don't know how they did
affair on the dog.
I can't get it out of my head.
Yeah, no, and that's what causes what's her face in the movie to scream and give up their because you can't. Yeah,
no spoilers. You got to see it.
No, right, but it's very upsetting, and so imagine seeing a giant creature like that is also part reptile, frog and
Frog Dog Man.
Frog Dog Man. Yes.
Hey. Call Stan Lee. Hey man, I got an idea.
Yeah, no, this is the stuff of nightmares. So that's and again, there's some reasons that might be much more mundane for some of these explanations, and I often believe that could also be the cause of these sightings.
Well, in addition to the apparition, the woman in white, which so many places have, but in addition to her, and then in addition to the chained men and the headless horse and the headless man and the black dog, also inside the structure there's a a walkway up
Yeah, it's
on
kind
one
of
that's-
it's kind of not a mezzanine, but sort of. It's like an upper walkway, which is very common in medieval structures.
Yes, and they have seen frequently, lots of people have seen a black shadow walking back and forth up there or appearing up there. And in the Ghost Hunters episode, they interviewed a couple of eyewitnesses, including there was a woman who was there, I think with her boyfriend or her husband, and they both saw two figures who then passed near them and made some kind of remark about killing little girls.
Well, that was, so the story goes with them is that they were there because you can stage people stage weddings there for believe it or not.
It's an event site.
It's an event,
I was at the website yesterday, and there you can go and see a symphony perform or whatever. They do stuff up there for sure. Yeah,
and again, like with most places, 99% of the time nothing happens, but it's that 1% something really scary happens. And with their story, they were there, I believe, having dinner or just afterwards, or kind of relaxing, and they hear this loud thump on the floor next to them. They both turn around, nothing's there, and then they both see these shadow people, dementors. We were talking. That's the flying creatures over the top of the castle. But some kind of black smoke, spectry beings approach them, and they hear clearly them whisper things about killing young girls.
Yeah.
So again, it's seen 1,000 years of really murderous behavior and death.
And then there's the other one that's, I think, one of the best ones from modern times is the gentleman. He's the current owner, isn't he?
Yeah, the current owner, and this is actually one of the best stories, and of course he spent the most amount of time there, is Jaromir Simonek. And I believe he's part of the Skoda automobile manufacturing family.
Well, yes, late in the early 1900s, I believe, the president of Skoda, the chief corporate officer. I remember
this would be like the mid to late 20s, I believe.
Yeah, he had started out with the company and he moved up and up and up and he was doing very well. He bought the castle in the early 1900s, and in the 1920s he passed away, and it changed hands a few times. And I believe in some of our research, what I had found was that through a legal case, it was returned to his descendants, and I think that's how this gentleman got it.
Yeah, well, the story I heard,
maybe his
actually,
parents got it.
Right, and from Pete and Travis, kind of what they explained is that when the communists take over, they claim everything, all your personal property, and then it belongs to whatever they want to do with it. But as Pete explained, they claim ownership, and then they don't really take care of it, so that it falls into disrepair. And then, of course, with the fall of communism, they kind of give it back, or you can, they don't want to give it back because the government would have nothing, as Pete said. So it's kind of a fight to get stuff back into private ownership. But if you don't know, Skoda is kind of the national car of Czechoslovakia, or the Czech Republic. So they're very proud of it. Well, it'd be like Henry Ford.
Yes.
He's like the father of Czech cars, Skoda. So a very prominent family, but he also has one of the best stories that you'll see in
this man who I believe is the grandson.
I think so. Yeah,
and he's a senior citizen. He's
he's probably in his late 60s, early 70s at least at this point. But why we're describing one of the stories from the show here is that it's often repeated in a lot of online articles on websites that feature this.
Yes.
Because it is one of the best stories. What I love also is that he was with some friends. They were having dinner, or again, just afterwards. That's when these things happen. So
Inside the castle. They're standing in the hall, as he described, I think on the second story. There is a table kind of in this hall, and they're talking. Hall being a room, not a hallway.
Exactly. Yeah. Yes. No. In the old traditional sense, the long room.
Yes.
He sets his wine glass down on the table as he's talking, and what does it do?
It levitates up into the air as he's describing it, it would seem like a few feet.
Yeah, off the table,
in front of him and a group of his friends. He reached out and grabbed it
in midair
and put it back down on the table. Which I would love to have seen his attitude this one, because maybe he knows it's on, and maybe he's just like, oh, come on,
Well, what do his friends think? Because he lives there, or he owns it. So what do they think?
So he puts it back down on the table, and after that, it slides from where he set it over to the exact middle of the table.
Yeah. So that's got to freak you out.
So between that and all the other stories and the apparitions, and then we're going back hundreds of years, if not, over 1,000, really, when you think about it. There's been a lot going on here for a long, long time. And what we wanted to do in terms of our research, and the ARC was just indisposable on this episode, especially since so much stuff was in a foreign language.
Yeah, so many disparate sources.
There was a lot to come up with, and I want to thank everybody in the Research Corps for all the free search they did, as Marie's husband says.
Yes.
But this story just unfolded like a blossoming flower. There's so much more to it than just it's a building on a hole, and which is what I thought, frankly, when we first decided to go.
A blossoming flower of evil.
Yes, nicely done.
Okay.
What was the onion? The haunted onion?
There was the haunted onion.
But
Still makes you cry.
I think that they're going to be able to share a lot of interesting information with you about the castle, also the history of the area, and how everything ties together.
Yeah, because one point I want to make here, which when we get to the description of it and kind of the initial history of how it came to be, one thing is undeniable, because you can always say, like, well, it's an old building. Sure, weird stuff happens. It's the heat. It's the stairs creaking. And really, people are just making this stuff up to give tours. Well, the building itself does not make any sense. And when you think about it, there's only one reason why it was made the way it was. Over many years, under great toil and contemporary expense and time, the reason that's the most unlikely and crazy and paranormal is the one that makes the most sense. And that's what I love about this building.
All right, so why don't we start out by talking about where it is? The first thing we should say is we haven't been to the Czech Republic. I really want to go, especially now.
No, 20 years ago, Prague was the place to go, especially if you were kind of a struggling writer, because things were cheap, the food was delicious and affordable. The beer was excellent.
Well, there you go.
Well, no, that's what all my friends
like
were.
A true bachelor.
Well, no, they were in college. It's like, hey, man, I'm going to write my novel in Prague, man. That's like, you can't go wrong there. And so this place that we're talking about, not that far north of Prague.
No, see, that's the good news. If you're in Prague, you're only about 40 miles away from it. It's 40 miles northeast of Prague.
Yeah, so it's about 64 kilometers north and a little east, directly above Prague.
Yes.
And close to the border. So if you're picturing the map, it's close to the northern border of the Czech Republic, kind of between the dividing line between Germany and Poland.
Yes.
Just slightly more on the German side if you draw a straight line between those borders there. And guess what? Not all that far away from Nazi Bell territory.
That's true.
Yeah, and those mines there. So again, lots of stuff going on in the area that's kind of mysterious.
It is one of the, as we said earlier, it's one of the best preserved castles from its time period. It is predominantly Gothic. It has a kind of a famous green chamber, a green room, which when you look it up, it's one of the first pictures that comes up is the green chamber, which has a bunch of paintings in it. And then it also has a knight's drawing room where knights would go and sketch pictures.
Yes, I think that's a good question, though. I think they were just drawn, it's like they were all drawn
I had
together.
to look up the drawing room.
Did you look up the,
I looked up the drawing room. A drawing room is a place to entertain folks and traditionally was connected to a stateroom where you might find the king or the most prominent member of the household. And so the drawing room would be right next door, and people would gather in it.
Yeah.
And then when the person came out from the stateroom, those were the first people they saw for the day.
Yeah.
They're here in the drawing room. But then later it became more of a thing. It was like, oh, it's a place to entertain. That's not where the masses are in the house.
Exactly.
It's less public.
Yes,
area.
it's more of a parlor where people did their entertaining.
Right. So this is where knights, they were not drawing pictures. Instead, they sat in there and talked about armor.
You're right. But there was a lot of that because it's a prominent area for, again, as we said, for Bohemia and a lot of the duchies and the knights of old and days of old. But they, that story. So the point though is that it's
folks, I have no idea what he's talking about. Just nod and pretend.
And days of old when knights were bold and I'm not going to do the whole.
What is it from?
There. Do you want me to look that up now?
No, don't look it up.
Okay.
Just, you can't
it's an old poem.
Oh.
Yeah, I can't remember the rest of it right now because you're derailing me here.
Oh, I'm sorry.
The point is
that's
that
my fault.
there's a lot going on, especially when you get to the late Middle Ages, the 1500s and 1600s. Lots of turmoil going on here, and again, leading up into the 30 Years' War, where there's even more. But during this period of time, people are just they're in villages. They're just trying to get by and subsistence farm and doing okay for the most part. But this is a very strange place. When you see the placement of the castle there's another huge clue that something's not right with this because it's in a very weird location.
Well, and on top of that, the other interesting thing about it is there is a prominent castle within eyesight known as Bezdiez, which I had to get Travis Dow to teach me how to say. But that castle is the more prominent castle in the area. It's well situated.
Yeah.
It's because what you want to do is you want to be near water, you want to be on high ground, you want to be defensible. It's also a good location to take care of people in the area if they are working in a village that's associated with the castle. And Bezdiez has all that going for it. Houska, not so much.
Yeah.
Houska is in the middle of nowhere,
Yeah.
remote even to this day,
Yes.
and the location has no real strategic purpose.
Here's the difference, is that Bezdiez is what a military fortification should be, which is the basic essential idea of a castle, is that whoever the leader is in the area, you're protecting him from an onslaught of marauders.
Yes.
And, in the old-fashioned English one, you had a bailey, so that people could rush in. You'd put up the drawbridge, and at least your core amount of people are going to get saved, and you can defend the area. And that's not totally the case but Bezdiez is more traditional in that sense, and it makes more sense. And that's not what you have with Houska. There's a lot of things about it that don't make common sense for any building.
Well, for one, there's no drinking water anywhere nearby.
Which means then you have to bring it all in.
Yes.
Yeah, which is a pain in the butt.
It's also not along any established trade routes. It's not near any local borders, old or new.
Right.
And also, by the way, it has no kitchen. It was not built with a kitchen. It was not built to be lived in.
Not
now,
really.
And it may have a kitchen now because it's a tourist site, but when it was built, there was not a kitchen in it.
Exactly.
And Tyler McGee, who was the property manager at the time when Ghost Hunters International was there in their episode Gate to Hell, said the following: "There's no other castle in the world that's Houska's duplicate. It's a cube within a cube within a cube. There are no fortifications, no trade paths, just thick woods, swamps, rocks. There's no water. There's no defense mechanism. There's no strategic importance. There is no reason for this structure to exist way out here in the middle of nowhere."
Or something to that effect. Those are my notes from the show, but
Yes.
but those
That's
are all
not
the
an
repeated
exact
points.
quote.
Yeah,
Yes.
no, but it doesn't matter. Those are all the same points, though, that everybody brings up because that's the facts, folks.
Yeah.
Is that you can't argue that there was water here at one time or it made sense. No, none of it makes sense to put a large giant stone castle there.
Yeah, I do want to say one thing. Just, we'll get into more of the sort of course correction, fact correction stuff in part 2 of this series. I do want to point out that at one time it did have some external defenses. It is still primarily focused on an internal defense system against something in the courtyard or where the gate to hell is.
Yeah.
That's its main function. But it did at one point have a moat. I think it had some earthen ramparts as well.
Right.
And those things were removed. I can't remember which king it was, and honestly, you guys don't need to believe me. We could be naming people every 3 seconds.
You're never going to remember them.
You're not going to remember. It's just going to muddy the water. But there was a point at which there was a king who was concerned that rebels may use fortified structures to mount an insurrection or something. So they went around and they just kind of made these old buildings a little bit easier to attack in the event that something should go wrong.
Because also what you have to remember throughout the course of history, different people are claiming ownership of this thing and they're using it for different purposes.
Yeah.
And so what's happening is that one guy will get in, it's like, well, this is weird, as the phrase you'll often hear with this building, it's inside out. And that the things that the fortification properties of it are on the inside, they should be on the outside. But that's the point, is that, as the years and the rulers of the area claim ownership of this place and use it for different things, they're making modifications or taking some away. That's what's happening throughout the years. But essentially, what's still there, the stone edifice itself, does not fit the usual pattern, layout, design of a building of that nature. So you also have to keep in mind, these things take years to build with great effort, as I said previously. It's not just willy-nilly or we forgot to put in an outlet in this room. It's nothing that small. This thing was intended to be this way. But as all the authorities who comment on this building that know what they're talking about will say, is that it does look like it was meant to contain. That's the thing you hear over and over, and that's really not up for debate.
And it's not a residence. It was never meant to be a residence.
Last week, something tragic and very unexpected happened to a good friend of mine. And I've already told Scott, but I thought I'd share it here because it's relevant to all of us. And he had a family, and he was only 54. I thought very carefully about whether or not I should share this because I don't want it to seem like I'm capitalizing on anything. It's just made me personally do a lot of thinking. And it was an important reminder for me that life is short. We should all make sure family is taken care of if something bad happens. And don't leave it to them to sort it out afterwards and struggle. Now, that should go without saying, but I don't think enough of us, myself included, plan enough or give enough thought about the eventualities in life. Now, my friend was a very responsible guy, so I'm sure he had something in place. And I'm not telling you what to do, but you should do something.
Well, I was sad to hear about your friend, and it's made me do a lot of thinking too. I get the feeling a lot of people don't have any life insurance because they don't want to think about it. They don't know the first step to go about getting it, and they think they can't afford it. What we're trying to do here is tell you about how to go check it out, so your family can get some security sooner than later. PolicyGenius.com is a quick and very easy way to just go learn about life insurance. Compare quotes, save some money, and find the policy that's best for you and your family. They have a team of licensed experts waiting to talk you through it, and Policy Genius has already placed over $5 billion in life insurance, so they know what they're doing. If you've been putting off life insurance, or you want to make sure the insurance you have is right for you, check out PolicyGenius.com today. You can save up to 40% just by comparing policies. The quotes are free, there's no sales pressure, and zero hassle. PolicyGenius.com. It's life insurance for the 21st century.
Forrest and Scott, thank you for supporting their sponsors. I'm Kat Wells. Now back to the show.
Now, here's one fun tidbit that you hear a lot being bandied around, especially on the websites, that may or may not be true, and Scott's going to fill you in on the real story here. But it adds to the lore, is that a lot of the windows in this building are fake. They're actually bricked up from the other side. They just want to look, they want you to think there's windows.
You know what this building is reminding me of? It's like those, when the water...
Disneyland?
No. Well, yeah, that too. That's
right.
a good point.
With the fake windows.
When the water department tries to put the pump station like right in the middle of the neighborhood, and they build like a little fake house, with a couple of fake trees, or, maybe they're even real trees, but there's no windows, and,
that kind of freaks
just
me
like
out.
A white pickup goes there once every 3 months,
Exactly. Well,
but without that, you wouldn't have water coming out of your tap. You know what else it reminds me of? And maybe you're right. Maybe we are getting punchy. Forrest just said that while we were stopped because it's a little late. It also reminds me of those cell phone towers that pretend to be trees.
With the fake limbs, yes. Well, I mean, that's not so scary. That's just kind of ugly. But the point here is that, what do you mean the windows aren't real? It kind of, what it reminded me of is that our Hollywood Ending, our first show, and the house with the windows that look kind of like the fake Thunder Mountain Railroad ride at Disneyland, and there's those little western towns, and they're fake windows, that it's unnerving. So that's another great element to the story, if it's not true, that these windows are just trying to make you feel better from the outside, but really they don't want anything getting in or out. But I think you're saying that it may not be true.
Yeah, you had come across that information, and I couldn't find it corroborated in any other place about the windows. I think it only came from one source. You and I were arguing about whether or not it was in the Ghost Hunters episode or written down somewhere. I'm not positive about that story. I do know that they recently discovered a room that they didn't know existed, and it had a window that it could account for the roots of that story.
Oh, I see. Yes.
Because the window was concealed by either earth or something that fell away. And then they saw the window and they were like, what is that? And then they figured out that at some point during prior construction, when the ceilings were lowered in part of the castle, that inadvertently a room had been created, a secret room. Yeah. It's the Cthulhu room. That's what Tess said. Yeah. But I think maybe it was just like a bad renovation. No, and then that might explain the origin for this false window story. Right. Because you can tell when you watch videos of the castle, they're inside, there's windows, and you can look out the windows. Yeah. But also, it's been through a ton of renovations over hundreds of years.
Exactly.
So
that's it.
I'm sure it has a kitchen now, for example. So,
well, I would hope so. A food prep area, anyway. Yeah. Just like your local Holiday Inn. So
no, you order it and it takes them 2 hours to bring it.
Well, they just heat it there. Yeah. So, but the point is that as we tell the story about the castle, you're going to hear recurring like leitmotifs, as we learned in film school, and modalities here of the legendary stories. Not only themes that have to deal with like bottomless pits, because you'll hear the same kinds of ideas and stories and legends keep coming up, but it's also, as you're just saying, there's something really scary about the sealed-in room. Like, it always reminded me of Edgar Allan Poe's Cask of Amontillado, where a guy gets sealed up, he gets bricked up after being chained up. It's horrifying.
Yeah.
So, true or not, it adds a lot to the Houska story.
It does indeed. Well, here's the only thing about it that is kind of castle-like.
Yeah.
And this connects it to religion as well, and this is something that will be a recurring theme as we discuss the idea of this place. It is on high ground. And
most fortifications are, because tactically it's easier to defend from a high position, because every military person will tell you it's easier
I have the
to
high ground.
Yeah, no, because it's true. So that's where you put your fortifications, your churches. It's reverent. The idea is that it's like a lot of places, but again, and there's certainly monasteries that are built way high up, but they're only meant to be habitated by monks, that climb up ropes. So this one is surrounded by cliffs.
It is surrounded by cliffs, but it's the one thing, though, that you can see it from a distance.
Yes.
If you wanted to build a castle to be an imposing structure, but also defensible, that is the one check mark that it has. It's a large building that you can see from a distance.
Yeah.
It is imposing, even though there's no reason, even though there's not a lot of other reasons for it to be there. Now, there was a rumor, and again, this may be more part two kind of thing, but there was a rumor that it was originally developed as almost some sort of office to manage the neighboring lands. And
it's a solid idea in that it was kind of an administrative building of the time to just function as like an office building.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know why you wouldn't have a kitchen, because we all need to eat lunch and have a snack. So, but it's not even got a kitchenette.
No.
Where you eat your yogurt. The idea, though, is that it could have been like a records keeping edifice for that. But even then, there's some problems that I have with this building. The main one being, you don't put a building over a hole. That just does not make sense in the first place.
Well, and before we move on from this, I did want to say something important to consider about the high ground again, and it's the aspect of it as it relates to religion, and that the idea that, especially in pagan religions, which is what was going on in the Slavic areas right about the time that the first castle, the wooden castle, was built, which we're going to explain the difference between the wooden one and the stone one here in a minute. There were a lot of pagans. Yeah. And part of the pagan rituals would require you to go to a high place, to go up on the mountain, pyramids, the symbology of that.
Yeah. Nature figures prominently. Places are sacred, so it's very tied into nature and animism, and so you just don't put a building up anywhere or some kind of altar or sacred place. It has to have significance with the surrounding nature, and so that's what you see here. But it's just an odd place to put a building that's kind of hard to get to.
All right, the next thing we want to do here is talk a little bit about the timeline of not only this location, but the structures that were built on it, and try to nail down when the gateway to hell opened up and what exactly it is. Now, in the open, I talked about Prince Slavobor, and he built the first wooden structure there that was intended to honor his son, Houska, around the year 878. And again, when we get back this far, all bets are off. It's like dates.
Yeah, but it's like all the Middle Ages. That's really hard for historians, because a lot of the records were lost, or they weren't taken
weren't even
down.
kept.
Yeah, exactly, in the first place. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, you'll see historians say that. It's like the Romans kept great records. You had great historians in that time, and then they hate the term, I think most professors and historians, the Dark Ages.
Yeah.
Because it's like, no, it wasn't. No, there was a lot of art and great flourishes of culture happening, but the record keeping is a little spotty. So that's what you're seeing here, is that they're just going about their lives, but solid records that weren't lost. Sometimes there's gaps.
There was definitely a shortage of scribes.
Right. Yeah.
Either that or they weren't able to keep the paper. Now, but let's talk about this. One of the things that was fascinating to me about this story when we first discovered it was that when Slavibor built that first structure in honor of his son Houska, It was wooden, and I couldn't understand why it was wooden. And the reason that it was wooden was because we were right on the cusp of stone castle building.
Yeah.
It's not that there weren't stone structures in the world, because there were. Yeah. There were mosques, there were things that were made of stone all over, but when it came to castles or homes, a lot of times what they would do was they would build with the wood. You would go to where you were going to build it, and you would get the wood from the area and make the building.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You're in the middle of a thick forest, so there's plenty of wood. It's a lot easier to work with. If you build a stone, a stone edifice, well, you have to get that stone from a quarry, and it's heavy, and you have to truck it over a long distance, depending on where the quarry is, where you're getting the stone. And it's a lot more solid, but it also will take years longer to build. So the first thing you build, if you can do it, is you build out of wood. And we still do that today.
Yeah, but here's the problem that they found out about the wood. One thing, aside from the fact that it doesn't last as long as stone, but they had no comparison because they hadn't even thought of using stone.
Right.
They were right on that cusp of it, but they hadn't quite done it yet. It's in the late 800s. It catches on fire real easy. So if somebody comes after you, all they've got to do is catch your building on fire.
A couple of flaming arrows and it's over.
Yeah, and you've got problems. But the real stone castle craze started later in the 900s. And if you look in England, for example, the White Tower that is part of the Tower of London was started in 1070.
Yeah.
So that was just a few hundred years after this first structure. So, but there is one thing that's really significant, and again points to the rich history of the Czech Republic. In Prague, the Prague Castle, which is monstrous, it is like the largest ancient castle in the world.
Yeah.
According to the Guinness Book of World Records, I found that out today. That was actually started in 870, but I don't know if the original construction was stone or wood. It evolved and evolved and evolved.
Yeah, right.
But when you look at it now, it looks like the most magnificent building in all the world. It's just unbelievable. And that's just 40 miles away in Prague. Now, Houska was and still is, as we've made quite clear, out in the sticks, as we say in the U.S. So wood was just the state of technology at the time that first structure was built. According to the legend, though, not too long after they built the original Castle Houska out of wood, the limestone on which it was built split open, and that's when the legend of the hell hole or hell mouth or gateway to hell was born.
Right. So if you look at the geology of the surrounding areas, the kind of the hilly cliffs there, it's a lot of limestone, and you're on the edge of the Sudetenland, so it's the mountain range there. I think near the Oder River. What happens with limestone geologically is that it erodes very easily, and as water flows through it, it eats away. That's how you get caves. That's how you get sinkholes. Well, that's what happened here. Is that a massive fissure opened up, and in geological terms, it can go way down. So that's what happens. The pit opens up. Now, the year is unknown, but the legend has it that it was pretty close to right after the original Castle Houska was built. So there's the start of all kind of the creepiness. Starts off nice wood structure. Once the earth opens up and now there's a bottomless pit, or seemingly bottomless, that's when things start to heat up.
Yeah, so that's when we already told you about all the things that were supposedly coming out of the pit. And essentially, this scared everyone who was living in the castle, which it's hard for us to know how long they were there exactly. But the long and short of it was they abandoned the castle, the original wooden Castle Houska. And nothing happened up there, and I probably went up there very much, for 300 to 400 years until King Ottokar II, or Heinrich Berke, the Duke of Duba, built the first stone castle on the same site as Slavibor's long ago decayed structure.
Right. Now, the legend is, and again, it's kind of unverifiable, but the reason it was abandoned and untouched is that immediately after the earth opened up into the giant mouth of hell, that's when the local villagers started seeing strange creatures. Their livestock gets killed or goes missing. People near the entrance of this, they say if you wandered too close, you were afflicted with like a crippling disease for a while. You kind of walked and talked funny for for a while, or you got sick.
I just want to quickly say I know what people are thinking, and we'll talk about it in part 2.
Yes. Well, no, I said that before. It's like there might be some natural reasons.
Yes.
But as I say with everything, it doesn't explain it all.
Right.
And we'll cover that as well. But there's a reason for them to kind of abandon this thing that they put so much time and effort into. They were freaking out. Crops are dying. There's a lot of, again, I think really it's the chimera. It's you don't want to see half human, half animal hybrids running around and beating on people.
Or Man Frog Dog.
Man Frog Dog.
It's a great band in the 70s.
You're going to want to avoid the area. So the locals especially avoided it at night because apparently that's when the creepy activity really ramped up. They would see flying things all the time. But yeah, strange dementors and all kinds of things were coming out of this. And so they left it alone for quite a while. And I think it's one of those things that, yes, we always talk about this, is that it's not happening every day. Like, it's 3:00. That's when the chimera comes out.
Yeah.
But enough throughout the ages that it keeps the legend alive and it keeps people afraid of it. And so when King Ottokar II gives his permission for something to be built, now we're talking about the stone structure that you're seeing today.
Yes, and this is somewhere in the latter part of the 13th century, although historians disagree about exactly when for all the reasons we've already mentioned.
Yeah, we're talking mid-1200s to the late 1200s.
Yes, and oh, by the way, I did want to tell you the weird thing about Ottokar II. He died on my birthday. August 26th.
Did he now?
1278.
Oh, well, happy birthday to both of you recently.
Thank you.
Okay.
That was 739 years ago.
But you don't look a day... Oh, you mean he is. Oh, yeah. No, you don't look a day over however old you are.
Well, what if I'm him reincarnated? I mean, he was a good guy, right?
He was, yeah. See, there was some, like you said before, there were some good guys that took care of their people, and there were some bad eggs.
I heard he was considered one of the greatest kings of Bohemia.
Well, if you're going to
Could be me, right? Could be.
I think you would have a better gig than this.
All right, so to recap, the day this show drops is the anniversary of the death of Saint Ludmila, and the day King Ottokar II died was my birthday.
Oh, very good. Some provenance
It's kind of thin, though, right?
Yeah, the little.
All right.
Yeah.
We do. By the way, we have to talk about Saint Ludmila.
No, and I think
her story is amazing.
You should launch into it because it is, again, classic Game of Thrones intrigue here.
Yeah, I'm going to try to keep this kind of short. There's a lot of people and a lot of names, but this is fascinating, and as it connects to Castle Houska and the myth and lore of the region, and for those of you who are Catholic and quite familiar with Saint Ludmila, please forgive me if I mess this story up, because I only learned it 3 days ago. But
he's crammed a lot into his head.
But let's see if I can figure this out. But remember how we were talking at the beginning about Prince Slavibor of Bohemia?
Yes.
He had a son, Houska, and a daughter, Ludmila. Houska is the one that he originally built, the wooden fortress, the very first Castle Houska up on the limestone before the chasm opened up.
He was a much beloved son.
Yes, he was a much beloved son. So he built that first structure up there sometime in the late 800s, it's believed. His daughter, though, Ludmila, she was born a pagan, by the way, but as she grew older, she converted in marriage shortly after her husband converted. They converted about the same time to Christianity. And it was interesting because, and that's what we were talking about, what's framing all of this and Castle Houska and the time period. And I was thinking a little bit about the Jersey Devil, frankly.
Yeah.
When we dove into the history of that, and you take a look at the bigger picture of what's going on culturally, with respect to William Penn and the Quakers and the colonization and
the Keithian stuff happening.
Yes, the Keithian controversy, all the ideas that people are having about what's going on, you've always got to take that into account when you consider how a legend is framed. And I'm not saying the same thing is happening here by any stretch. I'm just saying you've got to take a look at all the mitigating factors. And one of the things that is going on is that Christianity is emerging in the area, and these Slavic pagan religions are being overrun by it. But in Ludmila's case, her and her husband were converted to Christianity in a very kind way. I read a story from one of our books about how he met someone who I think his name was Methodius, who...
you're pretty close.
Yeah, who helped teach him about Christianity. He started by teaching him to be humble and, eating on the floor instead of at the table, and trying to help him understand about being pious and the difference between this and the other religion where you go out in the woods and you worship these 7 different things for these 8 different reasons and all that kind of stuff. So they made a conversion. And one of the interesting things about Ludmila and her husband is that eventually they retired to an area known as Tetine, which is where they had a castle, that there's still remnants of it there. And Tetine is west of Prague, so it's in the opposite direction from where Houska is. So the interesting thing about Ludmila is that her husband, who I don't know why I haven't mentioned up until now, I should mention it, his name was Boleslav. He was the first Duke of Bohemia. He's the one who converted to Christianity. And they wound up converting together. He and Ludmila had a son. And this son married a woman, this would be the daughter-in-law, named Drahomira. And they had a child who became Wenceslaus I, who eventually was canonized himself.
Oh, yeah, he's big time in Prague. Well,
Right.
he's big time in Czech Republic, yeah.
Yes, and the interesting thing about Drahomira is that she was not happy with the very close relationship that Ludmila had with her child.
Yeah.
And some of what we read had indicated that the primary reason she wasn't happy was because Ludmila was teaching Wenceslaus I about Christianity, and Drahomira was pagan.
And wanted to stay that way. And I'll tell you, old habits die hard with a lot of people.
Indeed. And Drahomira was not having it. I mean, aside from probably just flat out being jealous, she was not happy with how Ludmila was bringing up her son.
Right.
So eventually, Ludmila and Boleslav had retired to their retreat in Tetine, where they loved this place. This was a spiritual place for them. And there have been lots of wooden representations of pagan idols out in the woods there. When they converted, he had them all taken down.
Yeah.
And they felt like it was a good place for their spiritual awakening to adopt Christianity. And so it was kind of their base for that. And according to legend, Drahomir sent 2 guys to go visit Ludmila. Now,
Assassins.
Well, essentially. But she knew them, and they had dinner, and they ate as friends. But according to the book that I read, she knew that it was over when she saw them coming down the road. Now, she was already a widow at this point. Boleslav had died.
Right.
So she's alone in the castle at Tetine. I mean, not alone, literally, but figuratively alone. And these 2 come. She has dinner with them. She knows who they are. Drahomir has sent them. And then she retires to her chambers to go to bed. And they show up in the evening, and they have come to kill her. And she knows it. So she stops them for a moment, and she asks them if she can pray. And they allow her to pray. And when she finishes praying, she tells them that she would like to have her head cut off with a sword so that she may bleed like a martyr. Unfortunately, they did not agree to that. They killed her by some accounts with a rope, strangling her in her bed. Other accounts say that she was strangled with her own scarf.
Yeah. You hear that one a lot, too.
Yeah, you hear that one more often, actually. The rope one that I read was, again, in this book I had that had a historical account that seems to be very focused on the legend of what happened.
Yeah.
But she didn't survive. She was dead that night, and Drahomira had succeeded in having her killed. And
Right.
the two guys that came to kill her, I guess one of them's name was Tuna.
Well, it depends on where you put the accent.
I'm not sure where it goes. Tuna.
Yeah.
Well, Travis told me, Czech's easy. You always just got to emphasize the first syllable. So
Tuna.
Tuna.
There
And
you
the
go.
other one was Goman. And they were the 2, and they had been offered estates in silver by Drahomira. But after they killed Ludmila, they wound up being betrayed by Drahomira as well.
Yeah, there you go. That
doesn't
should be
ever
a
work out
lesson.
for you.
Yeah.
So Ludmila...
Not watching Game of Thrones themselves. Yeah.
Exactly. So Ludmila was buried in Tetine at a church not far from the place that was so close to her heart and to Borislav's heart. And Drahomira found out that semi-miraculous things were happening at Ludmila's grave.
Sainthood level.
Yeah, like the beautiful flowers were sprouting up
Over the grave.
over the grave all times of year. That it seemed to glow at night. So
Well, people will say that's fungus, but that's...
well, Drahomira got concerned about it, and so she went to Tetine and built a church over it. So officially now, Ludmila becomes a collection of relics, in a way.
Yeah. That idea, though, that you just said, build a church over it.
Yeah.
Our friends, Travis and Pete, had mentioned that as well, is that especially in Bohemia and Central Europe, when you're trying to balance out, I think in this case, Drahomira, it's freaking her out.
Yeah.
Like, I better cap this off. I better tie this off.
Yes.
Cinch it off bad. The same thing on the reverse is happening with Houska, in that if it's something negative, you build something nice on top of it, which is a chapel. So here, this is interesting because that ties in with the idea, though. It's like, whatever it is, we got to like sweep this under the rug, build something on top of it.
Yeah, and that's what they did with Houska, and I feel like we overlooked that. We should have mentioned that earlier. I did say it in the original opening of the show.
Yes, that's true.
But when Heinrich Berbe built the Houska Castle, he arranged for large stones to be put over the chasm and built a chapel directly above it.
Right, and so to be clear, the whole building is not a church. The large stone slabs are placed directly over the hole, and then on top of that is the chapel.
Yes.
But there's also a courtyard. There's, like you said, the drawing room, the nice drawing room. So there's these other buildings. There's an attic. There's also a basement, which is pretty creepy.
Yes.
And that's a great reason to watch the show, is you actually get to see it. You know what I'm saying?
There's a room called Satan's office.
Satan's office with Satan's office chair.
Yeah, there's a chair in it. You did not get it at Staples.
No, it doesn't look very comfortable, but it is creepy looking, and it has the intended effect. So, So when we talk about this building, it's not all one big open church area. There's different parts of it, but specifically over the whole is the chapel, and the reason is to cap it off with good. You enjoy a glass of wine every now and then, right?
I cook with wine. Sometimes I even add it to the food.
I think W.C. Fields said that.
He did.
And I think you got that quote off the flyer that sometimes comes in your Blue Apron delivery.
I did.
So you do know that Blue Apron also has kind of a wine club.
I do.
All right, Senor Taciturn, why don't you tell everyone a little bit about it then?
Well, it is kind of cool. In addition to all the other great food, cooking tips, and tools Blue Apron offers, they also have a monthly wine subscription service. You get to choose from an incredible selection of wines for your monthly delivery for about $10 a bottle, and their pairing-size wines hold the perfect amount for two to share. Not only that, you'll often get info cards with your regular Blue Apron delivery that tell you about what varieties are currently being featured, and sometimes they come with discount codes for your first shipment. You should check to see if it's offered where you live, but it really is worth checking into if you enjoy fine wines.
Well, what I like is that with each shipment, they'll school you on tasting notes, pairing tips, plus the story behind every wine, so I will appear way more sophisticated than I really am. It's just one of the many reasons Blue Apron is the #1 fresh ingredient and delivery service in the country.
And Blue Apron knows you're busy, so now they're offering 30-minute meals. These meals are made with the same flavor and farm-fresh ingredients you know and love, and are ready in 30 minutes or less.
Check out this week's menu and get your first 3 meals free with free shipping by going to blueapron.com/astonishing.
That's blueapron.com/astonishing.
Blue Apron, a better way to cook.
I'm Anastasia from Adelaide, Australia, and this is Astonishing Legends. Let's get back to the show.
So Wenceslaus I, who was very close to his grandmother Ludmila, in spite of the fact that his mom, Drahomira, built a church over her grave, decided that it was time to consider moving her closer to him. He wanted to have her closer to him. And also, as part of the process of canonization that was coming about for Ludmila to become a saint, it made sense to move her to St. George's Basilica in Prague. The interesting thing was that when they retrieved her relics from under the church in Tetine, that Drahomira...
You're talking about the corpse. Yes.
Yeah, the corpse, but they call it relics.
I know, the holy relics.
Yes.
Yeah, you're talking about that.
When they disinterred her, she did not appear to be decomposed at all. Not only that, she was smiling and had a bit of a glow about her, almost as though she could get up and walk away.
Well, that goes to part of the canonization process, is appearance of miracles or something miraculous.
Yes, and so she was canonized, and she became Saint Ludmila.
Well, a quick aside, we didn't really get to mention this in the Annalisa Michel episodes, but towards the end there were, let's say, factions that wanted to disinter her, Annalisa, to check for those signs, because this is just off the top of my head, it was a long time ago, but I believe there was a nun who said she may have had a vision that if they did, she would appear fresh as a daisy. And she petitioned the family. The state did not want to do it. Finally, there was so much pressure, they did. And no, pretty much what you would expect.
Fully decomposed.
Yeah.
So which I think we did mention.
Did we mention that?
I think so.
I'm not sure because I
sometimes it's fuzzy. The line between what we've researched and what made it into the show is
no,
fuzzy.
and you run out of time, and maybe it's not important. But I thought it was very interesting because that happened, and the family wanted to pursue that angle. The police, the authorities did not.
All we do is we're just trying to get people disinterred on here. We're still working on the Somerton Man.
Or disinterned, as I first stated. Yeah, just make them an intern and then not make them an intern. So,
yes.
But the case here is that there's something, at least contemporarily, there's something at the time that's so unusual that she is considered for sainthood.
Yes.
And so that's the important kind of wondrous part here. Not as creepy. I mean, yeah, you're digging people up, but that wonders are being observed with her.
Well, yes, and now that she is a saint, she is considered the patron saint of Bohemia.
Yeah.
Converts, the Czech Republic, duchesses.
Yeah.
And here's my favorite. Problems with in-laws and widows. But yeah, the problems with in-laws, considering that her daughter-in-law had her strangled, that's a big problem. And I just want to remind everyone that her feast day is celebrated on the 16th of September, the day that this show is being released.
If
and that
we're
is
lucky.
sheer coincidence. Yeah.
If we're lucky, it gets out.
But this just keeps happening to us.
No, there's
these
been
date things.
yeah.
Like when we picked this story, we didn't know that date. And
No.
But let's get further here, though. Why are we talking about Ludmila? How does she relate to Houska? Well, the first thing, just to recap, let me sum up so everybody can understand. Ludmila was the sister of Houska, who the original fortress or castle at Houska Castle was built on the limestone, the wooden one.
Yes.
And she also was martyred and became a saint, mostly due to her conversion to Christianity.
Right.
Keeping in mind that there's a religious conversion in general happening in this part of the world, and she's a figurehead in that movement.
Yeah, well, often that was a bloody conversion because, again, people, it's like the daughter-in-law. She wants to hold on to the old ways, and when you get to there's a bit of a backlash, and you saw this a little bit with Nazi Germany and people wanting to hold on to the folk ways, and that making a resurgence because it's part of people's identity. And so when you come in with a new religion, it's like, we're going to get rid of all that.
Yeah, go back to our Krampus show. We covered Krampus way before that movie recently came out.
Right.
But it talks about sort of pagan rituals and that sort of thing. It's fascinating.
And that's what you see with history. It can be argued that when Christianity comes in and you are talking about maybe the United Kingdom and areas like that, it's like, well, tell you what, you can keep some pagan things and some festivals. We'll just agree to most of this. You can still do a few of the things you love to do, like the harvest festivals and
like run down the street dressed like a bale of hay and smack women on the booty.
Yeah. So some of the things we'll let you do because they realize that if you get rid of all of it, well, it ain't going to go down real well. So let the people have their fun and their old traditions as long as they adopt the main tenets. Will be fine. But it's like things like with the boughs of holly and the fir boughs that are placed as decorations around Christmas time. It's Druidism.
Right.
So you let them keep some of that, but we're going to pray to the one true God.
There's a lot of Spinal Tap themes tonight. There's the Druids, there's the Hellhole. There's
that's true, yes.
Yeah,
well,
anyway.
It's a brilliant film, and that's why. So
if you haven't seen it, see it.
Exactly.
Well, all right, so let me just finish up with Ludmila. Part of the reason that she's significant, like we said, she is the sister to Houska, who the original fortress, the original castle was built for. But she also was a saint. But there's reason to believe that, considering that first castle was built for her brother, was that she spent time in the area where the current Houska Castle is. And not only that, there is a statue, a monument that was put to her. I mean, they're all over Czechoslovakia because she's a saint and she's revered by the people.
Yeah.
But there is a statue that was put up there by Houska Castle in 1758. And it's in the woods a little bit. It's a beautiful statue. We'll have a picture of it on the website. But the fascinating thing is it's not exactly in a prominent area. It's just up there by Houska Castle.
You're talking about the statue.
Of St. Ludmila. And so the question is, why is that there? Is it there to protect from evil?
Right.
Why do you put the saint up there? I mean, I guess you could say, well, you know what? Her family used to come here. They were the original developers of this land. But it's an interesting thing, and I think it's interesting considering how she died and the possibility of miracles associated with her, and the fact that she is now a saint.
Yeah.
And then they have this statue. I mean, they have statues of her in Prague as well. So
No, and also Wenceslas, good King Wenceslas, huge figure in Prague, especially beloved. But one thing, and I loved, we'll have a link, of course, to Travis and Pete's podcast on this subject because...
The Bohemian.
Bohemian podcast, because they actually went there. But I love listening to it because the tone is that, again, getting eyewitness accounts and firsthand accounts, that's the way to go. Somebody was there. And what they say when seeing the statue is that there's a creepy tone to it.
Yeah.
And not the statue itself, but the fact that it's placed kind of out in the brush. It's outside the gates of the castle or the area of the castle itself, kind of also, again, in the middle of nowhere. And so it's a weird positioning for it on the top of the hill there, at the very top. So they both said that they got a very strange, creepy vibe from the place. And not to steal any thunder, but really listen to it because you again, it's a first-hand account. It's like, yeah, they said... it's a creepy place. They've been to a lot of castles in the area. They love history, and they've checked them all out. And they said, like, no, this place is weird. So,
they're getting that feeling. That's that gut feeling.
That's exactly the personal feeling. And again, the statue of her and she herself as a figure are beloved, but there's something weird about where it's placed.
Well, let's move on in history a little bit. As we work down the timeline, we're trying to get to a certain point here before we wrap up part one. There's lots of stories that took place at the castle. There's a lot of weird stuff there. We told you about some of the earlier stuff. Now we're going to move into a little bit of a later time period to mention another story that is frequently associated with the castle, and that is the story of the assassination of Oronto. Oronto, yes, which I have to tell you, this one was a real conundrum for the Astonishing Research Corps, or what we call the ARC, which for those of you who are new to the show and don't know what that is, that's a group of volunteers that help us do research on the show.
Well, there's so many, especially with a story like this, there's so many leads that are lying in so many different places. It would take Scott and I a good 2 weeks 10 hours a day just to piece this all together and find it. So what they do is they go out and they call this stuff together, and then we still have to kind of collect it into a story. I'm not sure you're getting that here, but the idea is that all these little bits they will gather and say, like, well, here's something that connects to this. Now it conflicts with this other thing that we heard about. So there's some judgment decisions on what we kind of include and how we place it out. But basically, we were getting to another era here, which is well documented, called the 30 Years War.
Can you just give our listeners a brief, big picture overview of what the 30 Years War was?
Oh, yeah, this will be 30 seconds or less.
30 seconds on the 30 Years War. It's 30 on the 30.
It took place in Central Europe in between 1618 and 1648, and it was a big one. It's one of the most destructive, deadly wars ever to happen in Europe and the world. But I mean, just imagine 30 years going, and it took roughly, they estimate, about 8 million.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, no, and when you think about the populations not being that big then, 8 million is a lot of people.
Yeah.
So essentially what it was is it's a religious war. It starts off as that between various factions of Protestant and Catholic states, and all of this being fragmented under the Holy Roman Empire. And of course, what happens, like a lot of these things, it's really about power and control.
Right.
It's politics butting heads against religion or using one as an excuse for the other. So yeah, what you have is a religious state power, the Holy Roman Empire, butting heads against local powers and duchies, as I said before, who all now are employing mercenary armies. And it drags everybody in. And you're talking about the France-Habsburg rivalry. It's a mess. Read up on it because it's pretty significant. And again, it devastated a lot of Europe. So it's a big deal. But it also touches Bohemia, of course. Mostly centered in the German states and the German area here. But of course, it drags in what is today the Czech Republic and Prague and this whole region. So of course, eventually it's going to touch Houska.
And it does. And this was part of, and the reason I was mentioning the ARC earlier was because we kept finding this this story that was mentioned on the. It's the same story, the same 3 or 4 sentences initially on 55 blogs, which is what we always find when we start doing research on one of our episodes. It's that there's one blog that has information or one book that has been published or one paper somewhere, and then 7,000 people are plagiarizing it.
Well, yes. Well, because it's too much trouble and effort, and you're not sure anyway to go and try and go to the library. One book that we found that had a lot of great sources was not even at the LA Public Library.
Right.
So they didn't even have it, so we had to buy it. Well, that takes a week.
Yeah, it should be here in a few days. But,
so after we're on 3 other subjects.
Yeah,
yes.
but and that's happening to us all the time. But there was this guy, Oronto, that was mentioned on all these different places about this story, this famous story of Oronto, who was assassinated at Castle Houska. And we couldn't figure out who he was. We were digging and digging and digging, and finally we got to a source that told his story. Oronto, or Orontovi, which is part of the reason we couldn't find him.
Yeah, that's true, yes.
Was a Swedish mercenary leader.
Well, that's what happened in the 30 Years' War, is that you see the rise of the Swedish Empire.
Yes.
With their military victories. And so they come to claim control of the area as they push through.
Yes, but after the war was over, Oronto was trying to find a way to make a living, and it makes me think. It kind of makes me think, well, he's a mercenary. It makes me think about. It honestly makes me think about after the Civil War, these roving bands like Quantrill's Raiders. That's what it brings to mind. But so Oronto or Orontovi. Took over, moved into, had a band of criminals, essentially. I mean, they were mercenaries, but they were not nice people.
No, these guys, look, they make their living by brutality and violence and visiting violence upon people and civilians and everyone that are in their way, and that's what they know. And now they have nothing to do. Right.
So they go over to Castle Houska, probably not knowing its provenance, but who knows, which is abandoned at this time, and they take it over. They move in, and they're living there and partying it up. And what they're doing is they're going down to Melnik, where, in fact, this is where, I mean, it's much later, but this is where Borislav and Ludmila were from, and some of our other major players. And they go down to Melnik, and they're raping, pillaging, killing, robbing, stealing, and then they go back up to Castle Houska and party and drink and
well, that's where they're getting their supplies and their fun.
Exactly. Yeah. And the thing about Oronto was that he was thought by the villagers to be immortal. They thought that he could not be killed.
The cult of personality.
The stories were that the arrow, if you shot an arrow at him, it would bend around him, that nothing could hurt him. However,
the man who would be king.
Yes, exactly. However, there were a couple of hunters from the village who were convinced by the locals to go up there and take a shot at it.
Literally, yes.
But the rumor about Oronto was that he practiced black magic, and that was part of the reason he couldn't be killed.
Black magic and alchemy.
And
he was doing strange experiments, possibly on some of the villagers they captured.
In Castle Houska.
Yeah.
And this won't be the last time that kind of thing is happening there.
No.
So the two hunters go to a blacksmith who apparently was a little bit practiced in black magic. The blacksmith creates a couple of magic bullets that were forged at a specific time of night during a half moon, the whole 9 yards.
Oh, yeah.
Based on the research that I read.
Yeah.
The two hunters go up to Castle Houska from Melnik, which I believe is about 16 miles. And they're outside, and they call Oronto to the window. They yell his name. He comes to the window saying, "Who dares to call my name?"
All the great elements of a story, folks.
They level a weapon at him and shoot him right between the eyes with one of the black magic balls.
Really? Are you seriously?
That's what the story says.
Headshot, huh?
Headshot, right between the eyes. These hunters,
that's true, yes.
They're feeding their families.
Yeah.
I guess he fell down. He was alive for a moment. He called for his black hen. He apparently had a black hen that was part of his black magic ensemble. I guess the girl with the hat, the rabbit to pull out of a hat, was not around. And he called for the hen, I suppose, to try and save his life, but it couldn't. And I think the
what's
black
a chicken going to do, really? Just peck at you?
I think the black hen was the opposite of the the gold brood hen, which was another possible pagan idol.
Yes.
But please do not quote me on that.
Right.
Scholars, please send your emails to Forrest.
Please, all witches, refrain from emailing Scott.
Yeah, but anyway, he called out for the black hen. Black hen couldn't save him. He died. His men were scattered. They were not. Many of them were arrested, I think, and brought to justice. So that's
that's the thing. They were despised in the village.
Everyone hated them.
Yeah, because they were committing atrocities.
This was a Henry Plummer vigilante situation, really, because you sent these two guys up there to kill the leader, and they did.
Yeah, well, I mean, not even that. Even less structured. But the deal is that what's interesting is part of the legend is that he, at the time when he was at the window, was conducting his alchemy experiments to try and find the elixir of life.
Oh, yeah, that was supposedly what he was doing. That's right.
The Philosopher's Stone.
Yes.
Not the Sorcerer's Stone. The Philosopher's Stone. So you might think that that's a stretch, that he was actually trying to practice alchemy. However, in one of the frescoes, one of the paintings or drawings that really kind of faded, but there's we'll try and find some decent shots of this.
In the chapel.
In the chapels.
In Castle Houska.
Exactly. There's a drawing or kind of a faded fresco of St. Christopher. And St. Christopher is also the patron saint of alchemy.
So now, rounding out our timeline before we wrap up part 1 of our show here on Castle Houska, we have to talk about Karl Heinrich Macha, who was a poet, not widely recognized until after his death in Czechoslovakia.
No one else knowed it at the time.
Yeah, knowed it.
I
Please
know.
don't.
I'm trying to make the joke work.
The idea was 10 till 1 in the morning.
So sorry.
Forrest is...
Yeah, we're all punchy.
Yeah.
It's just two of us. No, the idea, he wasn't taken that seriously while he was alive. It was after his death that people... at the time, his poetry was kind of considered kind of complex, and there's a little bit of mocking going on, but after he passed away, he was considered a national treasure.
You know who else, by the way, who was buried at the cemetery at the castle in Prague, the big one I was talking about earlier, is Alphonse Mucha. Mucha is different from Macha. Mucha is an artist who, if you don't know his name, I guarantee you're familiar with his work. Look it up, Mucha. I digress. Again, it's late. So let's talk about Macha. The interesting thing about Macha was that he went in 1836 and spent the night during a walking tour of the region. Now, before I read this, I want to tell you guys about this company in Prague called McGee's Ghost Tours.
Oh, yeah.
They are so awesome. I actually contacted them. They had been featured on the Ghost Hunters International series, and I reached out to them on Skype. I called and spoke to Hannah McGee personally on the phone a few days ago and asked her a few questions to help iron some things out. And then we've since exchanged emails. And she's a super awesome person, very friendly. And their company is one of the prominent tour companies in Prague. And I can tell you right now that just based on her, I would highly recommend checking them out. If you're in Prague or you're going to Prague and you want to do some tours, check out mcgeesghosttours.com. We'll have a link to their website. It's MCGEES ghosttours.com if you're going there and you want to find some fun stuff to do. Now, one of the things that they have on their website, they have actually a really good summary of Houska Castle on the website and a lot of the things that happen there. And they have a nice little section on Macha and his experience at the castle in 1836. And I'm going to read this directly from their website. A couple of hundred years later, in 1836, during a walking tour of the region, Czech poet Karl Heinrich Macha spent a night at Houska, and supposedly in his dreams he was visited by a terrible vision, which he later recounted in a letter to his friend Edward Hindle. Macha described his soul descending into the pit. And you know which pit that is, right? Macha described his soul descending into the pit and then being transported into a hellish, mechanized future. Prague, 2006, where he wandered in horror and despair. Among other unnerving experiences in the vision, Macha wrote that he met a girl who showed him moving pictures in a small casket, and that in darkness he walked among high sandstone cliffs riddled with holes that projected an eerie yellow light, uncannily similar to the modern Sídliště, the enormous blocks of flats or apartments which in the present day loom above the outskirts of Prague. And remember, Macha was recounting all of this in 1836. So how did these visions of the future emerge from his subconscious? Was it really only a dream? Or is it possible that he was actually transported ahead in time. There are those who believe so. So, again, that's from McGee's Ghost Tours. Special thanks to Hannah for connecting us with answering our questions and helping us out. We are hoping that we can go take some of those tours ourselves. I just want to say the Ark, I think it was Quaid, dug up a picture of the Sidlisti, which is these huge apartments, and it couldn't look more exactly like what he's describing.
Are they, because they're white, right?
Yeah, well, they're
limestone looking,
multicolored, and they have the yellow light coming through the windows. It's very specific. It's a very specific vision that he's describing. And the same thing with watching the videos on a small casket. It's like watching something on an iPhone.
It's like watching TV in a small box, maybe, or, as he said, a casket, something along those lines. Or he just got a hold of the Nazi bell and transported for a few moments into the future. But what it sounds like to me when he said a hellish mechanized future, a little bit like H.G. Wells' Time Machine.
Yeah.
Where you're transported, well, that was underground. There's a lot of things going underground. It's like the Eloi and the Morlocks, where the narrator gets, he goes into the future in like 3,000 years, and it's this hellish, mechanized underground place. There's a lot of tie-ins. Well, H.G. Wells didn't write that. That wasn't published until 1895, The Time Machine. So, very prophetic dream, which rings true. So, it also reminds me a lot of Aleister Crowley spending the night in the pyramid, the Great Pyramid, and that's when he saw Lamb and the gray alien kind of being who came and spoke to him for a while. So not getting into that right here, but we've had a lot of people write in and say, like, we should cover that, Crowley and that story. But these are all the same kind of tropes and mythical setups for a lot of people. They go to a mystical place, they have a prophetic dream, they see visions, things are told to them. So we're seeing that here too. You said that letter was in 1836? Which was early into the 19th century. Well, he died in November on the 5th in 1836. So right after he sent that letter, he passed away. And he had a very short, tragic life. He was only 25. He apparently was helping to put out a fire a few days before the 5th. He overexerted himself, came down with pneumonia, and died on November 5th. Remember the 5th of November. And he was supposed to get married to his love the next day. So he had a short, tragic life and one brilliant vision of the future. So now, from the 1930s to the 1940s, well, you know what happens here. We have a whole new set of players, and so does Houska, the Nazis. That's going to wrap up part 1 of our series on Castle Houska, Gateway to Hell. We'll be back by the end of next weekend with part 2, where we'll go even deeper into the pit.
Special thanks again to the Ark. Please remember to support our sponsors, get books in our bookstore, buy our ringtone, join our Facebook group, and visit our Patreon page.
Special thanks to John Bolin.
Hi, I'm Kat Wells.
Hi, I'm Zach Bennett.
Hi, my name's Anastasia Bennett. BENNETT.
And I give permission to Astonishing Legends to use my voice however they see fit, galaxy-wide in perpetuity.
Our show is edited by Sarah Voorhees Wendell, and the theme is by Judson Crane.
Sound design is by Ryan McCullough.
Special thanks to the Ark and its lead researcher, Tess Feifel.
But most importantly, we want to thank our listeners. You can find us online at astonishinglegends.com, as well as Facebook, Patreon, Twitter, and Instagram.
Copyright Scott Philbrook
and Forrest Burgess. Good night.